Hello again and welcome to Inclusive Angles. Today I'm speaking with Erica Kawa, a multilingual journalist in Sierra Leone. He's a fixer, stringer, reporter, contributor for a number of international stations to be telling us about. He's a very young and vibrant journalist. He's told us stories you will not necessarily see on international media, if not for Eric. Oh, Eric, good to have you on Inclusive Angles.
Thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to be here.
How do you say welcome in Fulani?
Fulani, you say Sadima.
Sadima.
You know, you're one of those individuals that actually, the first planning editor that was like, getting your international platforms. I sent you an email. We're like, yeah, let's do this.
Of course. It's good to have local journalists report on their country. Now tell us, How did you get into journalism?
Okay, so journalism, first of all, growing up, I loved talking, so I was talkative. I talked a lot when we were traveling with my mom, whenever we were at gatherings. I'll be the one narrating stories or what used to happen and what didn't happen. So most of the part we were in Guinea, neighboring Guinea, which is a francophone country. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents and parents had moved there during the Civil War here in the late 90s. And so eventually we started schooling there. But my late grandfather now, he is someone who loved listening to the radio. He could listen to the news, the BBC, the RFI, and he would practically tell us all the stories. He was not formally educated. That's the interesting thing about him. He went through adult education, but then he could understand the news. He could explain the news in French and in English, and he could communicate in French and English as well. So he inspired me a lot growing up, listening to him. And it all started with me when I was in school, doing my school, an Anglophone school in Guinea called Hallelujah International School. That was in JSS1. And then they needed people to be doing news coverage to be doing like school news journals. So I started that way. My grandfather was giving me some information about news stories, and we go to school and we read them. And also part of a move to be on the spotlight, because when you're in school, you want to be eloquent, you want to get the platform, so you don't want to lay back. So during that process, then I started doing the news, and coming back to Sierra Leone, I had the opportunity of now joining the children's organizations and started doing program on the radio officially in 2010 with Culture Radio, back then doing children's program. So that's how it started.
I see. Did your grandfather talk to you about the Civil War and in a way maybe wanted you to tell stories about what happened?
Well, growing up, he used to listen back to the news, but maybe I was too young to be more interested in reporting on the stories back then. But then just to bring us back on memories on what had happened in the country. But growing up, he gave me news on politics. I remember one of the vivid elections that I remember was that of the Ivorian election, and that is how I got to know the name Alassane Ouattara. Okay. And there's another politician called Akuna Bade, something like that. So he used to give me those kind of information. And he would just dictate and explain to me, and I'll jot them down into bullet points. And then we go to the school at the assembly on Fridays usually. Then we give the news. So he would tell me about stories, and he has so much history. So he tells me about a lot of history and how these are connected. So also helping me to grow so much interest in learning about historical things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So then you started international journalism. Yeah, you see, I was the first planning producer that put you on there. But another producer recommended you to me. He worked with you during the Ebola crisis. And she was like, this is the guy you want in Sierra Leone.
Okay. Wow. So during the Ebola crisis, I was part of this youth program called Waiting Now, which was produced by Concept Multimedia. So we had a trip to Ghana, and I can say my media landscape also, I gained so much inspiration from Ghana. So we went to Ghana in 2015, and we had a team from Pre-Press Unlimited. Of course, we had Amma, who was part of the team as well. Who was part of the training at Joy News, and we did the training for a week. And afterwards, we came back to Sierra Leone, and I started doing regional reporting where I was reporting for Joy News and on TV, Joy News on radio. And also I did some reporting with TV3 in Ghana, with GH1 in Ghana. So that is how I started getting this something out of Sierra Leone. And all of a sudden in 2017, the first time I got contacted by Africanews, and was a point where there was the mudslide in Sierra Leone. So everyone was focused on the mudslide. The mudslide, this has affected, it has killed so many people.
Yeah.
But African news had this angle like, okay, Sierra Leone has faced all of these things, but then there is a new recent list that spoke about tourism. There was a boom in tourism in the country, visit increased, and so they needed someone to report from Sierra Leone. So for a while, then when the elections came, I had to write a follow-up again.
Yeah.
Time that it's like, okay, we're sending a team to Sierra Leone to report. I would really love you to assist them to be a fixer. And I started being a fixer for African News. I had there's a lady who came from CGTN, Susan Mwengele, and I helped her in fixing. And of course, she also recommended me to the CGTN team. And all of a sudden, I got a message from a producer at the VOA, the Voice of America, in 2021 when there was a tanker blast, and they also contacted me if I'll be willing to be reporting for them, and that's how I became a stranger for the Voice of America. So going forward, I've been selected for the storytelling program by the CNN Academy and the Rockefeller Cohort. I reported on so many
questions. On that.
Thank you. And also served as a fixer for BBC Africa. I did a report for BBC Africa in French at some point when we had a protest. So of course, with the international media, it seems like when there are disasters, when there are things happening, so there's a hunger for news. So people get to contact you. And if you're doing something great, your work gets to speak as well. So it has been quite a great experience.
For African News, I think at the time, like it said, Sierra Leone has been through a lot, but we wanted to get some good news from Sierra Leone. It's not always, news shouldn't always be bad. We know bad news sells, but it should be good news sometimes, So now that you're a fixer, freelancer, contributor, stringer, name it. You mentioned that when news happens, you have all the international stations, calling you, or everybody wants a piece of the news, and they want to hear from a journalist in the country. What are the challenges that come with that pressure?
I know this question usually comes up all the time. So sometimes if I know that there is a task that I can not probably, I think my hands are full, I do recommendations. So I've recommended some people in the past for different other media houses to see, okay, I used to juggle a lot with a lot of things. And I know that there's time for this, there's time for this. So if it's African News, I'm taking exclusive shots for African News. If it's CGTN, exclusive shots for CGTN. If it's VOA, exclusive shots for VOA. And also you have to be very careful because these are their media houses are also competitors. So you have to be sure that and with international media houses, it comes a lot with copyright, and you don't want to make sure that you share this footage. You're being commissioned, the story is being commissioned. So, but it all comes with passion as well, because if you don't have the passion, then it becomes a major challenge. And sometimes you feel like, I'm tired, I don't think I have to do this. Like yesterday, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I was completing the report for CGTN, and this morning I had to come to the radio to do my breakfast show at 7 a.m. So it's a whole lot, definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine, doing all the stringing and the fixing, reporting for the international media, and also having your own daytime job, I'll say, a full-time job at the radio station. That's
and I'm also an MC, so sometimes they call me to host events as well.
A man of many talents. During the Ebola crisis, where we had international media houses bring in their own reporters to the country to come and report. And now when something happens in your country, at least you have 2 or 3 media houses that call you to report on it. What do you think about using journalists present in the country to report on these issues?
So that is inclusive, I would say. In some cases, if you are on the ground, you understand the stories better. You understand your people better. So it's better to tell us your own stories than allowing other people to tell your stories. So if they're coming in and you're serving as fixers, which is why maybe they ask for fixers, because they want to also get the guide. What should I do? What should I not do? I remember I was doing a fixing job for an international media house, and one of the individuals, they were taking a picture of a child who was naked. I was like, oh my goodness, you're taking the dignity away. So please don't take that shot. So I am very mindful to be like, okay, in as much as we're telling stories about my country, it's going on international platform, then I also have to be very careful. Of course, maybe my biases can come there to make sure that I show, let's say, I don't want to do a stand-up in a background that is just ugly background. I don't want to do something in an ugly background. It's not on what the stories are, but just being mindful of, representing your country as well on an international platform. So because sometimes when you don't get to come to Africa, you don't see that we have great places like great beaches, we have great infrastructure as well, and all of these things. So you use this platform to show the people things that that these are actually positioned in my country in a positive way, and that could also lure in investors, lure in tourists to come in, because yes, Africa has a lot for people to explore. So you need to come and visit. Maybe with the media houses, international media houses, maybe it's so expensive to be bringing in a crew all the time to be, filming. So sometimes you need to take care of hotel, feeding in terms of flights and all of that. It costs a lot. So maybe it also would help down to help to cut down on the budget and all of that. So if you have someone on the ground who understands it, it's also okay. And it also gives exposures to these journalists, because there are lots and lots of talent in my country. Certainly, a lot of people who are grounded in reporting. They just need the right platform. They just need the kind of hands for people to just mold them and teach them some of the key ethics. And then it's actually something great and laudable to talk about.
How about the international media house that get in touch with you? Is that something that you want that in general for like stringers you worked with that also work with international media houses? Is that something that you'd wish they will improve on to help your work?
Yes, so that's very interesting. First of all, more motivation. Sometimes you have the story ideas, but if you have the story ideas, and I don't know how it works for journalists, but in some cases you don't get access to like gadgets. You have to get your gadgets yourself. You have to get everything yourself. I faced challenges in the past where probably I have all the expertise in reporting, but the technical aspect was really poor. So I had to go out and I have to pay a cameraman, pay an editor, so that they get to do this whole stuff working in properly. And sometimes we even have to rent gadgets. Sometimes even had stories that went, but because of sound system, they were rejected. And that was actually one of my fears. Sometimes I had actually spent maybe time producing a story. All of a sudden, we couldn't accept it because the sound was poor. This was not okay. This wasn't okay. So that's also another challenge. So maybe, maybe increasing the rates could be something. Sometimes
true.
Sometimes it's challenging, and sometimes maybe the rates don't get to change. When you get the rates over years, they don't get to increase that easily. And of course, the world keeps going higher. Things keep getting skyrocketing. So that's also one major challenge. So maybe that's one aspect they should look into. And also maybe even doing further trainings, deploying people to come into the country to also teach other individuals so they get to get this kind of, knowledge. Because sometimes you work with your producers, you haven't seen them for a long time, you understand them, you get all the work ethics, you work remotely, but you've never met them. It was great that I met.
I see.
It will be interesting to have these exchanges, maybe going to the country, studying how they do things and all of that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Okay, our time is almost up, but I need to ask you this question. What is your take on Africans telling their own stories?
Well, this is a very interesting one, because when we tell our stories, we own the narrative, and there's been a whole lot of, debate and conversations about changing the narrative, about dispelling rumors, about trying to, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions. So when we tell our stories, they're original. When we tell our stories, they come from the heart, and you understand what is really happening and who is really getting affected. And because we're here, we know what actually happens. If I'm going there to interview a politician and the politician tells me, well, this is actually good, they paint things they might be spinning to tell us that this is the situation. It takes a local who is in that country that feels the pains of, all the challenges to say, oh my goodness, this is not what happens. The good thing I like about the international media houses, even though when in some cases they do translations or voiceovers. So I interview someone in Creole, they talk the Creole language. So for the first few seconds, you hear the Creole going on. And of course, now the voiceover comes up. But then you still will understand that this language is something, and if it's Fulani, it's the same. In some cases, if you're doing longer pieces, then they will be written there as subtitles. So you get to hear the language itself, which is also very marketable, telling people that it's good. And sometimes I love appearing with my African, I love putting on my sometimes I love putting on my, let's say my lippy, or putting on my country club, or even putting on the kente to be on the stage. So that's also sometimes,
Thank you so much, Eric. It's been a pleasure talking to you. How do you say thank you in Fulani?
Ajarama.
Ajarama. How do you say thank you in Mandi?
Bike away.
Bike away.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been another exciting episode. We hope you join us again next month.